Hello, I'm Rick Harp, host of APTN News Brief, a daily podcast version of the nightly broadcast of APTN National News. Available on all major podcast platforms, APTN News Brief is your quick way to hear the headlines every weekday morning. Learn more at aptnnews.ca/podcasts.
We are APTN Investigates. On this episode.
Hi, I'm Christopher Reed. Prompted by a series of deaths, a Saskatchewan government report about Prince Albert Police is being kept secret. We take a closer look at what's going on in Prince Albert in my episode, Jailtown.
The Minister of Provincial Policing said the Prince Albert Police was struggling. Incidents including 3 in-custody deaths.
Do you have any idea how she might have died?
Not sure till we get the results from the autopsy.
There was a review done of the Prince Albert Police Service paid for by the province. Can you tell me what's your understanding of why that review was considered necessary?
Well, I'd be speaking out of turn if I started talking about why I think it might be necessary.
It has to stop. And I've always asked the police services, respect the vulnerable people. That's all we ask.
The administration here had not seen the entire report. And to this day, they have not seen the entire report because it's embargoed copy on behalf of the province of Saskatchewan.
It just makes it feel like they have something to hide when they're not releasing it, something negative to hide.
She always used to say that she wanted to go back to school. I guess that dream didn't come true.
Take a look around Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and you might notice, at 42% of the population, there are a lot of Indigenous people, compared to just a 5% population nationally. And there are a lot of correctional facilities. 5 in total, in a city with a population of 38,000.
It really looks like an unhealthy situation in Prince Albert. You have a culture of non-Indigenous people primarily being employed in prisons and with police, and a lack of Indigenous people working in those institutions. Instead, the Indigenous people, we suffer from high unemployment, high incarceration, and this reinforces the racism and stereotypes of Indigenous people.
In Prince Albert, about 1,000 people are employed in corrections and policing-related roles, and about 1,500 more are prisoners.
So there needs to be a change. As well, it also kind of raises the idea of the prison industrial complex, in which Indigenous peoples, in this model, Indigenous people are viewed as commodities.
So we've come to the University of Saskatchewan, where a sociology professor has worked the situation in Prince Albert into his course.
My name's John Hansen. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Saskatchewan, and I'm a member of the Opaskwayak Cree Nation in Manitoba. These stereotypes are widespread. The police are part of the population, and they see these stereotypes. They're exposed to them and influenced by them as well. And so, as a result, Indigenous people are, experience violence from the police. This creates and maintains distrust for the police.
News headlines from the last couple of years suggest an ongoing conflict of sorts, involving police and corrections facilities and Indigenous people. In the summer of 2023, a report looking at the Prince Albert Police was completed. The province hired a former Edmonton police chief to conduct a review of the Prince Albert Police Service. The review being prompted by a series of 3 deaths in custody at the Prince Albert Police Service's basement jail.
You know, I looked at the recommendations of that report with Prince Albert City Police, and, you know, it really doesn't address the systemic issues and, you know, the need for more Indigenous inclusion. And the report, it doesn't really have any Indigenous voices sitting at the table.
And if we don't bring Indigenous voices to the table and disrupt the way Indigenous people are represented in the culture, Hansen says a vicious cycle gets perpetuated.
I took some news stories from CBC News about Kyla Frenchman's case and the 3 in custody death, and we had a classroom discussion of of the treatment received by the police, and we related it to racialized stereotypes and historical colonization and ongoing colonization.
It's not right. Like, no woman should ever have to go through this that I'm going through.
Baby Tanner was killed by his father after Prince Albert police responded to the call from Tanner's mother, Kyla Frenchman, and arrested her when she'd called to ask the police for help.
In the case of Kyla Frenchman, she called out for the police to help. Instead of helping her, they arrested her, detained her, and now her baby is dead. She was concerned about the safety of her baby. It was about the worst thing she could do to call the police in her instance. You know, they did not help her at all.
We cannot afford to continue the same path where these tragedies can be easily avoided.
The final 70-page report examining the causes of these police problems has been kept mostly under wraps. APTN Investigates tried to get the province of Saskatchewan to release the report in a Freedom of Information request. But no luck. So as you can see, most of the pages have been redacted. They are left blank. Only the report's 6 pages of recommendations have been released. So how is the public supposed to know what is happening with the Prince Albert Police Service? For Hansen, the way to correct this is to adjust representation.
There's a lack of Indigenous people working in the criminal justice system, you know, and yet we have a lot of us, our people, are incarcerated in prisons, and there's a lack of Indigenous people working as prison guards, lack of Indigenous judges, lack of Indigenous lawyers, police officers.
She was a beautiful, awesome person, kind, and like they say, the Creator takes the best people, the prettiest people, I guess.
Tina McKenzie is the mother of Tatiana Custer, who died in custody at the Pine Grove Correctional Center in Prince Albert in early January of 2024.
I was told she was in the cells where they took her, I guess. And they found her unresponsive, and I guess they did their measures, like CPR, whatever. And they couldn't revive her, so they took her to the hospital where she was pronounced dead.
Understandably, this has been devastating for Mackenzie.
She was a good girl. She was like, playful, got along with other kids. She grew up in a good home, but she started hanging out with her peers, and And then by the time she was 15, she started drugs. But we tried everything to get her off whatever she was doing, to try and get her kid back and go to rehab. Kept saying, I'm gonna do it next month, next year. Never came to.
Tests still need to be done, which could take months. But she has been told her daughter had methamphetamine and fentanyl in her blood. And so now Mackenzie is left with just the memory of Tatiana.
She always used to say that she wanted to go back to school, finish her grade 12 and try and get into like Sask Polytech, do something, but I guess that dream didn't come true. That's how strong those drugs are for these young people. It gets the best of them.
APTN News presents a captivating journey into the heart of the North with our latest podcast, The Place That Thaws. The podcast is a unique exploration of the North, delving deep into the environmental challenges confronting the high Arctic.
Some areas that used to be safe are no longer safe.
Auyuituk, the place that never thaws, except that now it is thawing. Hosted by me, Danielle Parody. Join us as we uncover the intricacies of life on a changing coast. Experience the Arctic like never before. Subscribe and listen to The Place That Thaws, brought to you by APTN.
It's been just over 1 month since 23-year-old Tatiana Custer died while in custody at the Pine Grove Correctional Center. For her mother, Tina Mackenzie, the tragic circumstances surrounding her death have only left the family with more questions than answers. Do you have any idea of how she might have died?
No idea whatsoever. I'm thinking like it could have been fentanyl. That's what I heard, but not sure until we get the results from the autopsy.
The Saskatchewan Coroner's Office will be conducting an inquest regarding the death. That hasn't happened yet. To better understand what sort of investigation happens when a person dies in custody, we reached out to the provincial coroner.
So under our Saskatchewan Coroners Act, it's mandatory to hold an inquest if an inmate dies in custody. Our responsibility there is to find the cause of death, the medical cause of death, and then and provide that information to the police.
And what happens after the coroner's inquest?
There's no mandatory requirement for anybody to follow our recommendations. But what happens when we finish our investigation, we have the inquest done. The recommendations that come from the jury are then posted up publicly on our website so people can see what those recommendations are and who they've been assigned to. When I get a reply back from those agencies, then we post those on our website as well too, so that the public can see what the recommendations were and what that affected agency is going to do with those recommendations. But we do not have any power to mandatory make them enforce those.
But not everyone is on board with the idea that an inquest is always enough. In the case of Tatiana Custer, for example, the Prince Albert Grand Council, Grand Chief, Brian Hardlott, recently expressed that feeling in the media.
Well, any inmate dying in an institution, questions are asked. What's going on in the institution if inmates are dying? and someone has to speak up for them. So right away, it's my job. It's one of our members, or Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation, one of our member nations. It's my job, and of course, notifying the chief. You don't mind if I ask some questions. You don't mind if I do a press release.
Justice Hardlot has spoken in support of a fuller examination of what happened to Tatiana Custer.
It has to stop. Families like here, we can't go on we have to feel for the family. It's about humanity. We can't continue treating people like this, vulnerable people like this.
Saskatchewan's Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations has similarly backed investigation in what happened to Saul Lalibert.
And I've always asked the police services, respect the vulnerable people. Not only the vulnerable people, the people that you take into custody. That's all we ask.
Lalibert was one of the 3 men who died in custody at the Prince Albert Police Service jail that triggered the provincial review. And there is only one person we've found who has read that review. There was a review done of the Prince Albert Police Service paid for by the province. Can you tell me what's your understanding of why that review was considered necessary?
Well, I'd be speaking out of turn if I started talking about why I think it might be necessary. What I can tell you, though, is that when I first came to Prince Albert, I came as an interim chief of police. So in June of 2023, I was asked by the province to step in and fill that role as this organization was going through some transition. In that capacity, I was aware that the province had ordered an inquiry into the operations of the Prince Albert Police Service, and as a result of that, there were some recommendations that came forward. Before I came into this role, I wanted to ensure that I had as much insight into what the recommendations said, where the organization was going, and I'd been provided with a copy of those to review prior to making a decision to actually come in as an interim chief of police.
Nogier was impressed to discover the police were already implementing the report's recommendations.
I was able to ascertain that a number of the recommendations had already been in progress. And a really important part of this is that the administration here had not seen the entire report. And to this day, they have not seen the entire report because it's embargoed copy on behalf of the province of Saskatchewan.
This is a report about the Prince Albert Police Service. Why wouldn't it be, widely available to anyone in, senior management at the police?
That's a good question. It's likely a question for the province. It's their report. The province was responsible for bringing in that independent oversight, for having the review done, and ultimately being in charge of the recommendations.
Huh. But you've seen the whole report?
Correct.
Okay. And how many people here have seen the whole report?
To my knowledge, I'm the only one.
Really? Mm-hmm. Do you think it would be beneficial for others here to see it?
Some of that would be beneficial. Some of that might not be beneficial within the organization. The most important part is if the recommendations are deemed to be valid recommendations, what steps does the organization take to accomplish those goals? And if so, in my opinion, the rest of the matter is irrelevant.
To be clear, the report commissioned by the province of Saskatchewan and written by Rod Knecht, a former Edmonton police chief, is 70 pages long. The province's Sunshine List tells us Rod Knecht and Associates were paid $77,000 for their work. The recommendations section of the report is just 6 pages long, and those 6 pages are the only ones that have been released to the public. According to Nogier, those 6 pages are also the only part of the report seen by senior management of the Prince Albert Police, other than him. Why do you think it is that most of that has been kept secret?
I don't know.
Does the report contain information about Prince Albert police officers that could potentially result in criminal charges?
I'd have to go back and refresh my memory. Like, in particular, like, can you be more specific?
I just am imagining what people might be wondering. This is a report that no one can see. They don't know what's in it. Maybe there's some stuff in that report that is about police officers doing things they shouldn't have been doing. That could result in criminal charges, and maybe that's why they don't want to release it.
Yeah, you know, that's a lot of speculation. If there was that notion that the report contains something more nefarious with respect to criminal activity, about practices that could be deemed to be criminal in nature, and there wasn't one recommendation that came as a result of it, then, you know, the group would lose the credibility. You know, so once again, you know, I'd have to go back and look specifically through the report to determine if anything that you're suggesting even exists. But once again, you know, if it's not in the recommendation, I would suggest otherwise.
Of course, APTN Investigates wasn't alone in raising the idea that some people think this taxpayer-funded report should be public. Both the Prince Albert Grand Council and the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations expressed that sentiment. And the Prince Albert Grand Council and the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations demand that the report be released is something I put to Nogier.
The only thing that I could say to them is that they're aware of what the recommendations are. If they have questions about the implementation of recommendations, if they have suggestions about how the recommendation falls short, if they have a suggestion about, you know, what could we do differently, we are going to be an organization that's going to engage with the community, and we're willing to sit down and discuss those. I would much rather look at what's forward-leaning rather than what's been drummed up in the past.
In fairness, it's not for Patrick Nogier to release the report. It's the provincial government's report. We asked them why it's being kept secret, and they told us there are personal, sensitive, and confidential details in the report that cannot be released publicly.
He should not be the only one. It raises some serious issues about a lack of transparency.
At the University of Saskatchewan, John Hansen says the report should be public.
Yeah, you know, it's a public service. The public should be made aware of the report, you know, and I think it just makes it feel like they have something to hide when they're not releasing it, something negative to hide, as if there's some details in that report that show a lot more problems, that it's probably just the tip of the iceberg.
Further answers could be forthcoming when Tyson Morash gets to court. Morash is a Prince Albert police officer charged in the death of Saul Lalibert. His case still is pending.
We don't have a voice. We're not sitting at the table. We're not part of the decision-making process. You know, and if they do release the report to the public, that would be great, because then we could start moving toward healing. We can start looking at transparency and seeing a fuller picture of what's going on in the criminal justice system. And then the Indigenous people should be part of the process of identifying what went wrong and how we can work on it so it doesn't happen again.
In a jail town with 5 institutions to pick from, it's not hard to imagine how prison might seem like a more concrete reality for life here in Prince Albert. Like most of Canada, the town itself isn't immune to the lasting impacts of colonialism, especially as it relates to the Indigenous population. And as with most deeply rooted social issues, there are never any easy answers or solutions. But with time, there can be healing.
There is a way to heal it, and that would be to work on having more Indigenous inclusion. There is a way to heal it, but there's also, you know, colonialism is a structure. It just keeps getting reproduced. It's been going on and it's been reproduced. These same issues have been going on for decades.
Thanks for listening to this story. If you'd like to hear more from Investigates, visit aptnnews.ca/podcasts. You can watch APTN Investigates every Friday on APTN. Visit us on social media and catch up on our stories at aptnnews.ca, the APTN News YouTube channel, and the APTN News app. The Investigates team includes reporters Brittany Guillot, Christopher Reed, and Kenneth Jackson, and video journalists Rob Smith and Tom Fenario. I'm Josh Grummett, and I'm an associate producer for the show. Our producer is Colin Crozier, and our executive producer is Paul Barnsley. Members of the APTN National News team also contribute to many of our stories. Once again, thanks for listening.
I'm Kathleen Martins, a reporter with APTN News. Homeless, houseless, shelterless people, they aren't hard to find in Winnipeg. They're on the sidewalks, in bus shelters, and down alleyways. They're living in tents and squatting in empty buildings. They're even sleeping in abandoned cars. But who are they? Hear their stories in my new 5-part podcast called Our Relatives. Listen on your favorite player.